Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VBIS webinar. Today, our special guest is Jamie Morrison, who will be talking about our NeuroTracker cognitive therapy service. We are so excited to share some information about what NeuroTracker is, how it helps brain injury survivors, and why it might be beneficial to you. So thank you so much, Jamie, for being a guest on today's podcast. We know you have a busy schedule, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. Thank you, Cara, for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking a bit about our cognitive training program as well as the research that we are conducting alongside of it. Yeah.
That's amazing. I guess I'll just start by asking you a little bit about yourself. So what's your correlation with VBIS and what schooling are you doing?
Of course. So I am the Victoria Brain Injury Society's research coordinator and a master's student in the neuroscience graduate program up at the University of Victoria. So basically, I began my involvement with VBIS as a volunteer back in September of 2020 and was then hired on as a staff member in May of 2021. Since I've had the pleasure of working in roles of volunteer coordination, outreach, and program facilitation. And through my undergraduate education, I was lucky to have the opportunity to conduct brain injury research with the University of Victoria Christie Lab. So thanks to all the guidance and support from Dr. Brian Christie and PhD candidate Taylor Snowden, I decided to then pursue my master's degree to continue conducting research, which is what I really love. And just a brief little summary, but my thesis project is a collaboration with the Christie Lab and Victoria Brain Injury Society. And we're working to investigate the effects of cognitive training with NeuroTracker software on functional, cognitive, and biological outcomes for people living with moderate to severe traumatic brain injury.
That's amazing. You do such important work, so it's good that we're recognizing you a little bit. So from my understanding, NeuroTracker is a form of cognitive therapy. So do you mind just telling us a little bit about what cognitive therapy is and how it differs from other forms of therapy?
Of course, yeah. So I like to explain it like this. We all know that it's important to exercise our bodies, but it's also important to exercise our brains. So cognitive training tools like NeuroTracker, which we use, can allow us to do just so. NeuroTracker uses a task called three-dimensional multiple object tracking, which is essentially a 3D video game where you track spheres on a screen to stimulate your brain. And this task works by simultaneously engaging all four lobes of your brain to isolate these low-level cognitive functions of working memory, attention, and visual processing. So cognitive training's effectiveness can be explained through the concept in neuroscience that is called neuroplasticity. And if you're unfamiliar with this refers to your brain's ability to change over time. So in neuroscience, we have the saying, what fires together wires together. And this can be all related back to NeuroTracker. So if you are repetitively engaging in cognitive processes like memory and attention, the connections between the neurons in your brain responsible for these can be strengthened over time. So what's really nice about NeuroTracker that we use is that it is an adaptive tool, which is especially important when you're working with brain injury survivors. So if the user of NeuroTracker is doing well at the task, the next session is going to speed up and make it a bit harder for the individual. And if someone's struggling, the next session will slow down, meaning that the tool is going to be constantly at a level that is optimally engaging and stimulating for the user's brain.
That's amazing. I really love the idea that it kind of adjusts itself to the needs of each survivor, because as we know, brain injuries are so situational and not everyone's dealing with the same thing. So that's a super cool aspect to this tool. So what made you choose to do research surrounding NeuroTracker specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So starting kind of with my personal connections, I knew I wanted to work in the field of brain injury for quite a long time, as I have a close family member that's been affected by traumatic brain injury. And then through my time volunteering at VBIS, I was introduced to NeuroTracker and the Christie Lab. And the Christie Lab itself, there's kind of a history there of NeuroTracker. So they have been studying brain injury in their concussion lab component of the Christie Lab for the past 15 years. And specifically, NeuroTracker is a tool that was initially designed for enhancing sports performance in athletes. And the Christie Lab was working with a professional hockey team at that time that happened to be using NeuroTracker. And the researchers noticed that certain athletes were performing worse than expected on NeuroTracker. And it just so happened that this group of individuals had a recent history of concussion. So from that point forward, our lab, the Christie Lab, began researching if NeuroTracker, the task, could be used as a biomarker for concussion. So in this time since, there have been lots of wonderful studies conducted through the Christie Lab, and they have found that performance on the NeuroTracker task strongly correlates with standard measures of concussion. As well, NeuroTracker scores could predict with 95% accuracy if someone had and was experiencing post-concussion syndrome. Furthermore, we know that NeuroTracker is being used to enhance memory, attention, and executive functions in athletes. But we also recognize that these are cognitive functions that are commonly impaired after a brain injury, and therefore wondered if this tool could then be used to improve outcomes in brain injury survivors. So this led to the amazing pilot work conducted by PhD candidate Taylor Snowden, who I mentioned before, which collaborated with VBIS to understand if 5 weeks of cognitive training with NeuroTracker could benefit brain injury survivors. And there were some really exciting findings from this. Specifically, we found improved cognition and improved functional outcomes in survivors. And so my colleague Taylor, who I have mentioned, she's currently working on a project to understand the effects of NeuroTracker training in older adults with histories of mild traumatic brain injuries, which are also known as concussions. And then I wanted to examine if NeuroTracker could improve outcomes in people with more moderate to severe traumatic brain injuries. So here I am. Both Taylor and I's research is also including a blood and saliva collection component before and after a NeuroTracker intervention, which we hope will help us better understand the biological mechanisms behind the cognitive improvement that we see after NeuroTracker training in this population.
Amazing. And do you mind just touching on what are some of the common cognitive challenges experienced by brain injury survivors specifically?
Yeah, of course. So we know that every brain injury is going to be unique. So cognitive challenges will vary drastically between individuals. But some common ones can include, but are not limited to, issues with memory, attention, learning, speech, judgment, and processing speed. As well, we know that recovery after brain injury is not going to be a linear process. So some days cognitive functions will be better than others, and that's completely okay and normal. I also think it's important to recognize while we're on the topic of this that living with these cognitive challenges on a daily basis can then result in many different intersecting challenges for survivors, such as mental health challenges, changes in relationships, substance use, unemployment, and homelessness, just to name some. And therefore, that's why, finding such accessible tools to improve cognition could also have the potential to improve functional outcomes in people living with brain injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And then are there any risks associated with trying NeuroTracker?
No, there's no risk. So NeuroTracker has been widely used and documented in different ages and demographics to be a safe tool. It's non-invasive. It's essentially a 3D video game and a relatively low-cost therapy. However, I like to acknowledge, especially when working with a population of brain injury survivors, that since NeuroTracker is administered through a screen, there's going to be some risk for sore eyes, headaches, dizziness, and tiredness, as with any use of screens. So especially since these symptoms may be already exacerbated in survivors of brain injury, I just like to make this clear to those who are going to engage in NeuroTracker training.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I find it so cool that you can literally play a video game and that it counts as therapy. I think that's super, super awesome. A cool little fact about NeuroTracker.
Mhm.
So what are some of the short-term benefits?
Yeah, so with Taylor's pilot research in the Christie Lab, it was indicating that TBI survivors had significantly improved performance on standardized neuropsychological tests of memory, attention, and verbal fluency. As well, participants reported significant reductions in brain injury related symptoms, so the total number of symptoms and the severity of these symptoms. As well, an assessment was done that looked at the number of daily life challenges that an individual was perceiving, and those also significantly reduced after the intervention. Furthermore, through our program, just offering NeuroTracker at VBIS, this is not through a specific research project, but I have had participants report to me that they've had drastic improvements in their sleep and enhanced mental clarity. So it's really great to hear that individuals are experiencing these positive things after the training.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And then can you talk a little bit about some of the long-term benefits too?
Yeah, great question. So the long-term benefits of NeuroTracker for brain injury survivors are still under investigation. We can't say anything conclusively. So our work in the Christie lab currently will investigate whether these positive effects are present after stopping NeuroTracker for 1 month. So we have a 1-month follow-up after our intervention. So that will provide a little insight into that. However, a lot more research on even longer time points and more replications of these studies need to be considered and conducted before we can suggest any concrete conclusions on the long-term benefits.
Well, that's totally makes sense to me. I feel like even with those short-term benefits after hearing those, it would definitely be something I'd be interested in if I had experienced a traumatic brain injury. But just for anybody watching this webinar that wants to try cognitive therapy, what steps should they take or who should they contact?
Of course. So at VBIS, we offer a free NeuroTracker cognitive training program called Train Your Brain for brain injury survivors. They can contact myself. So my email is jamie@vbis.ca for any direct questions. You can also check out our VBIS webpage for more information on the Train Your Brain program, or just by contacting our organization by phone, email, through our website. Any one of our team members can put you in the right direction for joining the program or potentially engaging in some of our research studies around it that we are looking at.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Jamie. Do you have any questions for me?
I think that is everything I have for today. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. And yeah, thanks again so much for taking the time out of your day. And then just to anybody watching, stay tuned for some upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara.
Bye.